Hi, I'm Lynne Matallana, and this is eHealth Media, and we are here today with the very esteemed doctor, Dr. Williams from the University of Michigan, who has been studying pain and fatigue for over 30 years. And today we're going to talk about a really important subject for people living with chronic pain, depression and anxiety. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for being here.
Sure, Lynn.
You know, so many people wonder, is it the chicken or the egg? Did depression start first or did the pain start first? Can you explain a little bit about what that relationship is?
Sure, and that's a great question, because for a long time we used to think that people who had chronic pain maybe started off having depression, and something about the depression made them more vulnerable to having chronic pain. However, that's not usually the experience of folks. People with chronic pain will say, I was fine until I had the chronic pain, and living with pain can make you very depressed. It can make you feel bad, and the depression came on secondarily. What we do know from genetic studies, though, is that people who are prone to getting chronic pain also tend to have an affective vulnerability. And so they may be people who are prone to having an emotional type of difficulty as well as having chronic pain. So it's still a little bit of the chicken and the egg, although I think most recent studies are showing that when chronic pain comes on, then the depression tends to follow.
But can it be the other way around?
It certainly can, and there are cases where somebody starts off with depression and then ends up having chronic pain.
So is depression just feeling down and blue, or is it much more intense than that?
Well, I think people will describe it as being much more intense. I think everybody has good days and bad days, but depression really has a biological basis to it, where there are deficiencies of certain neurotransmitters within the central nervous system, which is also why certain medications that restore those neurotransmitters can help depression as well.
So depression isn't just something you can snap out of by going and doing something that makes you happy, because it is a biological problem.
Well, it's a biological problem in as much as we can understand some of the biology behind it and can be treated many times with medications. But what you do, whether it's exercise or engaging in meaningful activities, being involved in things, being social, those are behaviors that you can do that can also have a biological effect. And so engaging in those behaviors sometimes can go ahead and restore those neurochemicals naturally. And so taking medications, but also engaging in activities that are meaningful or engaging in exercise can help depression as well.
So that's important, but you can't wish yourself well immediately. It's something that takes time and takes support from other people and your healthcare professional, and it really is a team then that helps you get better besides your own personal activities.
Certainly. I mean, your involvement needs to be important, but your relationship with your provider and your team is incredibly important, because that's your support network.
It's sad because so many people that I've heard from have said, you know, my family just doesn't understand why I feel the way I do, and they just don't, you know, support me in the way that I would like. Can you explain how important it is that family and friends, employers actually do understand that this is a real problem, and that a lot of people are suffering with this, and that they do need help and support?
Certainly, and part of the problem with depression and with chronic pain is that both of those things don't necessarily have something you can see. You know, if you have a broken arm, you have a cast on it, you can see, obviously you're in pain. But many forms of chronic pain, and certainly depression, there's nothing visible, and you kind of experience it and you live with it day to day, but most people don't see what you're suffering with. And so the only way they can really know how you're doing is if you tell them about it. And many times family can be very supportive, but many times they'll try to do the wrong type of support. For example, it's very common for families to take all the responsibility away from the person who has pain and just says, well, you just should rest and we'll take care of everything. Well, that might help with acute pain, because
Right.
resting while you recover, then you're back, going again. But to lose all your responsibilities and all the things that might bring meaning to your life or that you get some benefit from by engaging in, if all those things are removed for you by your employer or by your family, then you don't have anything to do that makes you feel good about yourself and improve your self-esteem.
So support for someone that has depression is extremely important, and the stigma of having an illness like fibromyalgia or anxiety, all of these things, as time goes on, people seem to be accepting them more. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's been a real push in education and educating providers, but also educating at the level of the patient. And so I think that there's been such a push. There's been more available on the internet. There's magazines. There's lots of print media. There's lectures, webinars. There's lots of outlets that now can educate patients about how depression and chronic pain can travel together. And what you can do about it. And I think people are more accepting because it's not something that is so bizarre anymore. It's fairly common.
Don't you think also people that have these disorders that maybe are well known, coming out and expressing that they have dealt with it has helped?
That helps as well. I mean, having role models showing that there's this other human side and that they may have something that is shared.
How about anxiety? I know that a lot of people maybe don't totally understand what anxiety is, and is it a real disorder?
So anxiety, there are anxiety disorders. There's many of them. There's phobias. There's post-traumatic stress disorder. There's general anxiety, and so it comes in different forms. We know in the terms of pain that having anxiety, it doesn't have to be at a clinical level of anxiety, but just a lower level of anxiety can interfere with things like dentistry, where there may be some pain involved. So it certainly impacts acute pain, but we're learning more and more about the idea that having anxiety, either subacutely or having an anxiety disorder, can certainly make chronic pain more intense as well.
Fear is something that makes pain worse too, and so if you're afraid to have someone, hold you or touch you, or what the next day is going to be like, or are they going to ever figure out a way to help me feel better? These things weigh on people. How do you suggest that they try to overcome the fear?
Overcoming fear can be a challenge, and we know certainly in the case of, say, low back pain, that many times people are injured at work. And so even though they may go through some rehabilitation for their back pain, going back to work can engender some fear. And certainly when you have fear, that makes pain worse. And so the idea of going back to work may be tied very closely to the fear of re-injury. So many times what will happen is a way of kind of becoming desensitized to the fear, very gradually going back to the work or doing different types of work, so that you can find out and actually experience that you can engage in some of these activities without the increase in pain. But it takes time, and it takes it's a very gradual process to overcome the fear, because the fear was based on that initial experience.
So with all of these illnesses, it's really important for people to understand that it does take time, that it takes support, it takes communication, that there are a lot of components to help you to get better. Working with other people that have the same problems, talking to them, motivating one another, is that helpful?
Oh, incredibly helpful. And unlike some forms of medicine where you have a very set approach or prescription to how to make it happen, in the case of chronic pain, it's very important that you and your provider have a relationship. And because there is no one answer that works for everyone. We are fairly good at treating acute pain. We have a lot yet to learn about treating chronic pain. But one thing we do know is that the relationship between the provider and the patient has to be a good one. Because the patient needs to try out some things. The provider can be a guide, make suggestions, but the patient has to try these things out and see what works for them. And so it really is kind of an experimental approach in terms of the patient trying things, coming back to the provider, saying what worked or what didn't work, and then getting the right mix for that individual.
So you really have to trust your healthcare provider and feel comfortable with them.
Yes, and the provider has to trust the patient too.
And if you don't feel that way, is it a bad thing to change doctors?
It's not. I mean, being able to look around and find the provider that makes the best fit with you, I would say I would recommend doing that.
Excellent. Well, you've answered a lot of questions. I know there's a lot more, and I know in the future we'll be talking about this again, and I appreciate you being here today. So I want to thank Dr. Dave Williams from the University of Michigan. I'm Lynne Matallana, and I'll see you next time.